all of the kind of the style that I have is not necessarily
having each other to compete with. So he began taking barefoot water ski lessons and just got better and better. They kept entering all the competitions, and at 12, Mike became national barefoot water ski champion.
Anything he tried, he usually excelled at. And from that point on, it was, here he is trying it, here he is excelling at it, here he is being the best at it. And
he was different than everybody else because he sort of was, he had this air about him that was not us. I mean, we were all the, Mike was out and he was successful. He did water skiing. He was like, you know, that cool kid in high school.
From the time he was 2, he was always wanting a piece of paper and a pencil, and he just drew and drew and drew.
When he was younger, he used to draw all the time. He drew his mom and his brother and everybody as superheroes and whatnot. And he, in high school, used to tell me he'd be the one that would always get tagged to draw the homecoming banners or different artwork that they needed for his school or whatnot.
He didn't read comic books. He never had art lessons in high school or anything, so he definitely was able to develop his own personal style.
He never was into comic books, really, because there's a story Mike used to tell all the time. His town where he grew up was a smaller town in Tennessee, and they didn't have too many comic book shops and everything. And
what do you mean you never draw superheroes as a kid? Look at this crappy Batman from when you were 7. He's like, oh, well, and I'm like, yeah, right, whatever.
He played video games, you know, when Dungeon Master and all those things came out, and Avatar or something, so I don't know all of it.
You know, it was Batman from the TV, or it was Batman from some other place. When you're a little kid, you pick up these things all over the place.
A video game, anything in life, anything he did, if he hadn't tried it before, it just took a couple times of doing it, and he became good at it, and then he became great at it. And it was like that with pretty much everything for him growing up.
He had great admiration and love for his stepfather, Jim Crick.
Med school, he was a doctor, or training to become a doctor.
And he would tell them funny stories about the emergency room and all this, and they just absolutely adored him. So he kept talking to Jim, and he wanted to be like him.
It was not his thing. Not that he wasn't succeeding at it, he was doing really well.
So he came to us and said that he wanted to drop out of school and go experience life more on the West Coast, or to start out in Aspen.
He did. He left town. He worked his way across the country and did various stuff. And when he got to Aspen, this is a whole another world for him.
He had truly never been too many times out of Tennessee, and when he got to Aspen, he loved it so much.
His personality really developed there, I think, where he found that in being himself, he was more like the people there than he was like the people in Tennessee. And so he just continued to develop his personality that way, and then decided that later he would move to the West Coast.
The reason he got into comics was because he was in Choi Lee Foot karate, and he was an instructor, and he wound up getting hurt. He broke his foot, and so while he was laid up, he wound up doing some submissions because his mom was telling him she was good friends with Shel Dorf.
Shel Dorf was one of the original founders of the San Diego Comic-Con.
So after he broke his foot, that was just the time that he started spending. He wasn't at school, and he wasn't, sitting around on the couch.
And he said, the comic convention is coming up, so have Mike give me a call.
His mom had encouraged him to do samples for Shel Dorf, who was running the convention.
So I called, like I said, I called Mike, and I said, okay, get up. First thing you're going to do in the morning is call Shel Dorf. This call is going to change the rest of your life.
Mike put together I think it was 6 pages of submissions at the time, and went and showed them around, and wound up getting 3 different phone calls, and David Wohl from Top Cow was one of them.
David Wohl, who was our editor-in-chief at the time, was looking around at samples, and he found this guy named Michael Turner, who I had never heard of. I actually had not met him at the convention. He found him actually at the
This is usually longer than this, and then a sharpener, which I also don't have, but I'm sure somebody here has one of the little lead holder sharpeners. And then I use you're trying to figure out all the different elements of that, and you want to still stay in there and get rough with it. Knowing exactly where everything is, and then try to then get your personality. Whatever she's going to be looking like. And then at that point, then you would go in and do the finished drawing. So that's kind of how I lay out all the different things. I do the layouts in my little sketchbook. I'll transport right to the board, and then I'll go through these 4 steps. And then once you get all the line work exactly perfect with the pencil, then you go back in and pick a light source. If you want to add blacks, if you want to do rendering, then that's sort of the stage at which I do that. See that? Yeah. All right. Thank you. All right. So the different body types you have. You can have the sort of the young, and all of the kind of the style that I have is not necessarily realistic, but it tends towards realistics, but it's also kind of stretched out. I kind of stretch everything out a little bit. You know, I don't do 8.5 heads high. I do about 10 heads high on some characters. But one thing is sort of the weighting. If the character's standing there, you want to augment or opposite the hip and the shoulders. This is kind of because that's just sort of how the body stands. When you're standing on one hip, the other shoulder comes up. That's kind of the younger version is, not too voluptuous. I'm really trying to be PC here. I don't know where to go with that. All right. So that's kind of the Supergirl body type, and then you have your more Lady Death action, which I don't draw that often. Is a little bit more over the top, a little wider hips. And then huge hair. And then you have your, see if I can guess this one. Granny Goodness. That's the first one I was going to draw since she's so hot. All right, anyway. I think I'm going to open it up for questions, and then I'll probably definitely the younger someone is, like starting at a little kid, the bigger their forehead is, the bigger their eyes are, the smaller all the rest of their features are. Little ears, little nose, little chin, little mouth, everything else. So if you're drawing, and I draw big eyes anyway, but like we'll do like a young Aspen here. And then you got just the little eyebrows, and it's all with sort of expression too, like doing a little kid, all evil, and everything is it looks even more evil because it's not normal. You got Chucky going, but and then when I'm doing the eyes, there's one thing that with women that you want to make sure that you don't do is draw. You don't want to draw like all the eyelashes individually, even though there might be every single one of those eyelashes really exists in reality, it really looks weird when it's put down on paper. So I kind of group the eyelashes into groupings, so it's more of a shape for the eyelash instead of all the individual eyelashes. Second thing is you don't want to draw the whole pupil of the eye and the iris and everything perfectly, because if you draw it all perfectly, it may all be there, and all these little lines and all these little things and highlights and stuff, but it looks really strange when it's drawn out and represented in black and white. So you want to indicate at those things. It's all about sort of letting the imagination, same with the clothing, same going back all the way to the theme I had originally. The more you leave to the imagination, the more your mind's going to come up with something better than somebody can put on paper. So you just kind of lead them in the right direction with the eye, just by sort of indicating that there's like highlights underneath it, and it just looks more interesting. And then you have the sort of eyelash shapes, and there's my. Then you put in the little details, and then really evil eyes, and a happy little tree. All right. So back to the little girl. Now their noses are usually shorter. Like you just take a face and compact it. And you guys, oh, little cute little assets. And then bigger forehead, little ears, little chin. Kind of mongoloid. I don't usually draw with a Sharpie that much, or with one of these contraptions. Just like Star Trek. Alright, so little mongoloid baby asking. But usually a little more of a button nose. But the lips can start getting a little bit more full. And then, usually a little more of a button nose. But the lips can start getting a little bit more full. Usually a little more of a button nose. But the lips can start getting a little bit more full. And then, the face is still kind of thin and lean. Not too much definition. So you just round things out. Like this one is almost just a big oval. This one starts having a little bit more of the jaw, a little bit more of the chin, and then smaller eyes. And there you go. And then as you get older, you can start putting in more definition into the face. Like Grace is much older than Aspen, so with her, you get more of the firm nose, and from the front it's not as easy. And again, with noses, you don't want to draw like the whole nose. So the more lines you put on a woman's face, or even anywhere on the body, the older it makes them look. It makes them look wrinkled or anything. So you don't want to draw the whole nose and then put the little lines that come down from the mouth. And then have all the lips there, and then draw like the nose line and then the eyes. It's just the more you leave to the imagination, the better. So just sort of indicate, like on this one, you just kind of indicate where the nose is. Just little things. So you can just do just the nostrils, and maybe just a little indication on the top of the nose, and then the lips. But yeah, just with all the eyes, if you start doing all the little lines that really, that do exist, but don't necessarily exist in black on your face. I mean, they exist in like little shades, and like the lines that are here are little shades, but they're not like black lines. So that's what you really want to be really careful with. You can have the colors to add those things later, if necessary. All right. Or just lunging forward. And again, when I would lay all this out, I would lay it out like I'd lay it out like this, really, really rough, and just get the motion of what was going on, and make sure it all. So you got the right arm going forward, and in Kung Fu they used to teach us that when you punch forward, you pull the other one back as hard as you can, and it turns your stomach, it turns your chest, and you punch further. So when you're drawing, you got to think those things. And when I did a lot of stuff with Nottingham back in Witchblade, I was taking a lot of like sword forms and different things that I knew when I was doing Kung Fu. But that's when you're doing, that's the most dynamic, and it's also going to be the most power, which is also the best thing to draw, is because you want to draw the most dynamic. So the right arm's going forward, and you're stepping forward with the opposite foot. So if you're going to do a punch, then right arm forward, right leg back, and then pulling this end back. It could be back in a fist like this, or it could be up ready to punch again, or it just could be out, however you want to do it. And again, this is, you don't do your layouts with a Sharpie, by the way. But that's just sort of the general idea of getting that fluid motion, so it feels like there's a direct line into what you're going into. And so that's just one of the sort of punching things. It's kind of got like the the over the shoulder look is. I've drawn 1,000 times. Yeah. Then you got, let's see, if the body's forward, but then you twist so it's almost sideways. Just the more torso twist, the more you're going to feel more real, and it's going to also keep your drawings from looking stiff. That looks nothing like what I was trying to go for, but. All right, let's see another pose. Let's try foreshortening. Foreshortening poses are usually the most difficult. The one angle that you want to be really careful with on women is the up shot, because it tends to not look as attractive when you have the huge thighs, and then the smaller features up here don't look as good on a woman as it does on like a bad guy. So you want to be really careful with that. The foreshortening is always something that, let's do like a down angle. When laying this out, I'll always draw through the figure as if you're drawing in 3D yourself, and you're drawing like around. And here's where you do set up the sort of the tubes and blocks and such, but I still sort of set it up in the form of what I'm doing, and always sort of draw through the back side of whatever you're doing as if you're drawing around. It's going to be much less. And a good rule of thumb too is if you're standing there and you wanted to draw somebody on the ground laying next to them, use the body size feature that you have of her feet and draw like a person, like with those size feet. Let's see if that looks right. I mean, would the person be that small standing in front of this person? Probably not. It looks like their legs are like 300 feet long. So that's a good rule of. That looks like a good rule. That's a good rule of thumb to tell if you're drawing the body sizes the right shape or not. Is like take a feature mid figure and then draw a human sideways right next to him and then see if it looks right. And that's just kind of a nice little rule of thumb. Okay. And just sit there when you're on the phone someday and sort of practice sort of throwing lines that curve this way, lines that curve different ways, like pulling lines to you. And then when I'm doing the hair, I'll just do that. I'll have a head, and then I'll just kind of throw out some hair, and then I'll just bring it back in. Is it too loud?
No, it's too loud.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Keep talking.
Okay. Hello? Hello? Wow, 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 wow. Right. So that's with the hair, and then you take your eraser. Use your eraser as much as you use your pencil when you're doing hair, so you get the overlays of hair. I'll draw the different things in like this, and get a good sort of base for the hair, and then I'll take an eraser, which you can't do with a Sharpie, but you take an eraser and just kind of draw a line right over the top, and then you'll fill in the hair on the top of it, so you have the one strand that goes across the rest of them, and then is erased. Or you can do the strand, take an eraser and erase the inside of it, depends on whatever you feel like doing. And that's going to get the flow going in those directions, and then against those directions. That's for the long, sort of the long hair. The short hair is easier because it's obviously less flow.
はい、それでは勇気を与えるニーアオトマタ
This is what happened. Hi, first time watching What Has Happened. Happening. Who is that? iPixel.
Pull up, lift, lift, lift. Head, 2, 3.
Like if I want to start grabbing this guy and putting him into a pose that I might use, say I have an idea for illustration or something. It'll select through, like if I have the rotate selected and I'm holding down my little control button here, the mask will like, see how it kind of goes with your topology. So if it's really clean in there, if your lines are clean, then you get a nice selection. I can soften that selection. I reversed it, and then I lost it. And then I can kind of bend on there, and it gives me a nice, smooth transition. Or I can just use a lasso what I want, I reverse it out. But really nice. Sometimes I'll just stay in that rotate mode. I'm going to turn off symmetry. So I can just grab one leg. Don't do that. Do this instead.
Ben, there's a couple questions more from Twitter here.
Sure.
So, Ramsey B, how many times do you Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever ZBrush Summit. So we're super excited for everyone to be here. We're super excited to be able to stream everything to you at your computers, your iPads, your iPhones, your Rokus if you have them. Please make sure to also download the app if you want to use the live stream app to tune into this. We've got a great live audience here as well. We've got a great list of presenters today. So just again, I just want to quickly go through some of the highlights of the event for these next 3 days. We've got Disney showing some exclusive stuff from Big Hero 6. They're obviously also going to be showing some stuff from Frozen. We've got Ubisoft showing Far Cry 4, never before seen images, tomorrow. That's really exciting. Disney is also tomorrow. We also on Sunday have Red Storm showing some exclusive stuff from The Division, specifically the weapons and how they do all that within that studio. And of course, we have the ZBrush Next version being demoed during any slot that you see where there's pixel logic. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Mr. Vance Kovacs.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome this afternoon. I've been in a car for the last couple of hours driving from Riverside County, so forgive my trafficy, congested productions here in Irvine, California, and Orange. The excitement of it. I work in a similar manner. I scribble a lot, I scratch a lot, I try to find what that image could be. I want to go through that whole process. I'm working by impulse and by inspiration. Those are my big fuels. So constantly.
Got to work on some pretty cool stuff in that short amount of time. So when Seth approached me to say, hey, do you want to give a talk at ZBrush? I said, absolutely. The community has given me so much, so I want to try to give back whenever I can. I came up with this cheesy Carsman sales pitch for my title, that ZBrush is the answer to all of your modeling needs. So my goal of the talk was mainly to present ways and show you guys just how we use ZBrush at Blizzard. They've been using it long before I got there, but particularly with the Overwatch shorts, Warcraft, and also some statues. But I also want to reach out to students out there or maybe people that are just getting started. I'm going to show you some of my tips and workflows, and as well as these guys here, just to help alleviate any of that initial stress so that you guys feel welcome to just jump in and get your hands dirty.
Hey, Shannon, you want to F5 or Shift F5 that to full screen it?
Yeah. Boom. All right, so like I said, I'm going to talk to you guys mainly about the Overwatch shorts, a little bit about Warcraft Legion, and also some statues that we get to work on. So one of my favorite things about working at Blizzard in cinematics is that you never really know what you're going to get to work on. The projects always vary from time to time, and just being an artist, if there are people out there not yet in production, you generally have no idea what you're going to work on. Someone just comes up to you and says, hey, now you're going to start to do this. It's like, okay, cool. But at Blizzard in particular, some of those things that they tell you are actually like, holy crap, this is really cool. So first we're going to talk about Overwatch, and based on the applause for the winner of the game down there, some of you guys know what Overwatch is. If you don't, here's a super, super quick edit of a video that I grabbed of some of the shorts that we've been working on. That's fine. Cool. So super short. I have a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm going to kind of try to go quick and also give these guys plenty of time for theirs. So in the last year and a half, we've created about six animated shorts as well as a commercial. I've been lucky to work on all of these in some capacity. What we do in the character modeling team, so the cinematics is split up between character modeling and environment modeling. And we're in charge of all the characters in the game, anything that basically moves or moves with the character. So since Overwatch is already out, there's a game for it. All these characters have already been built by the Overwatch game team. Renaud Galland and his amazing team have created the 21 heroes that the game launches with, fully modeled, textured. And they spent a lot of time developing this really awesome visual style for them. So we don't want to reinvent that or spend time trying to plus it up or do anything differently to it. It works, and we're honoring that. So there's two separate approaches that we do with the shorts. If the character already exists in the game, we actually get the game asset from the game team. And then the other approach is if we have characters that don't exist in the game yet, so background characters, maybe a new character that we're introducing, we actually get to create those from scratch. First, I'm going to talk to you guys just about how we handle the game characters. So here's a shot of Matt Taylor's model of Bastion from the game on the screen left, and our model on screen right. So it's pretty close on him. We moved the arms out just for rotation for the rig. But myself and Jason Wang worked on converting this asset. And like I said, we're just trying to honor their work already, so we're not trying to change it at all. We also want the player to have the same one-to-one relationship with what they see in the short and what they get to play in the game. So for example, even like the flowers on his legs and on his head and the grass, all this stuff was meticulously matched just so that it looks accurate whenever you're playing the game or if you see the short. Here's the topology from the game model on the left, again, ours on the right. One of the main differences is that we have to subdivide our models, so we render as sub-Ds. So we have to bevel all the edges, and we also cut in all the details, whereas they can use a lot of tricks with normal maps. I'll show you an example a little bit later with Hanzo. Another example is 76. This was done by Haifan. On the right, Tasso Giannis did this model. Another thing that we don't do on the shorts is we don't do any cloth simulation. We're under really quick time frames for these, and we have a super small team, so we actually cut in all the geo for the clothing. All the seam lines, all the folding and wrinkling is actually cut into the mesh. Here's an example of a handoff. This is from Haifan again. This is the Hanzo model that he's completed for the game, and this is his high-res mesh that I was handed to start converting and processing for our pipeline. And one of the first things we do is we match our GenMan topology to the skin, and then we bake displacement maps from that. Like I said, we don't use any maps on the skin or the clothing. I'm sorry, on the clothing. Like I said, we just have to model all that stuff in. So you'll see here that the topology changes quite a bit. It's super low res, and it's optimized so that the animators can animate in real time. These are some of the details I was just mentioning, and these little floater bits that they cut in with normal maps. And we literally just use Maya's poly tools. It used to be Nex to cut all this stuff in by hand. Here's a look at the final cinematic model. So we send this over to the game team when we're all done and say like, hey, look, this is still your character. Like, we want to make sure that we didn't miss anything, or they say, hey, that part's not looking quite right. So we always get final approval from them. And here's the final topology. We also baked displacement maps for the glove on this guy just to keep it low, because it had actually kind of smaller wrinkles, and we didn't want to get the topology that high. And here's a turntable that we would send off to the game team. In a shot in the cinematic. A lot of cool stuff added on here. Obviously, the servicing, the effects team did an amazing.
Delete mesh is if you want to use your masking brush, so holding down Control, you can select the mesh. So in this case, I'm going to delete this droplet here. So I select the areas of the mesh that I don't want to delete. So I'm just using my Control, click and drag for masking here. So I've selected all the areas of the mesh that I don't want to delete. Then in my tool menu here, I'm going to scroll down to visibility. And underneath visibility, I'm going to click hide part. And that's going to hide any part of the mesh here that isn't masked. So click hide part, that hides that part of the mesh. Now if I scroll back up to the top, under geometry, modify topology rollout, there's a delete hidden. And so what this will do is delete any part of the mesh that you've hidden, whether you've hidden it using the visibility option or polygroups isolation, doesn't matter. So if I click delete hidden, it has now deleted that part of the mesh. Problem being now is that we have a hole in the mesh here, which we can fix by dynameshing, but you can also click by clicking this close holes under modify topology as well. You'll notice that it gives it some triangulated geometry, which isn't ideal always, so you may want to dynamesh or zero mesh afterwards. Thanks. Hey, welcome to ZBrush Tips Shoot. In this one I'm just going to quickly show you how to delete mesh, which is something that people often struggle with when they're first starting. So a quick and easy way to delete mesh is if you want to use your masking brush, so holding down Control, you can select the mesh. So in this case I'm going to delete this droplet here. So I select the areas of the mesh that I don't want to delete. So I'm just using my Control, click and drag for masking here. So I've selected all the areas of the mesh that I don't want to delete. Then in my tool menu here, I'm going to scroll down to visibility, and underneath visibility I'm going to click hide part, and that's going to hide any part of the mesh here that isn't masked. So click hide part, that hides that part of the mesh. Now if I scroll back up to the top, under geometry, modify topology rollout, there's a delete hidden, and so what this will do is delete any part of the mesh that you've hidden, whether you've hidden it using the visibility option or polygroups isolation, it doesn't matter. So if I click delete hidden, it has now deleted that part of the mesh. Problem being now is that we have a hole in the mesh here, which we can fix by dynameshing, but you can also click by clicking this close holes under modify topology as well. You'll notice that it gives it some triangulated geometry, which isn't ideal always, so you may want to dynamesh or zero mesh afterwards. Thanks.
amazing job. The lighting, it all comes together pretty awesome. So the second approach is the more creative approach whenever we actually get to create something new that isn't already done. But the challenge with this is to maintain it into the same world that they've spent a lot of time developing in the same visual style. So this is just an example of an image that Renault sent over to us that kind of demonstrates what they were doing as they were finding the look of Overwatch. On the left, screen left, the character has just a little bit too much detail. You can see that a lot of the cross-hatching is just kind of going everywhere. There's nowhere really for your eye to rest when you're looking at the image. They also provided just like ideas back here of like what they're always thinking of whenever they're making the characters. So they really want them to read. It's a very simplistic yet graphic style, and it's very clean. So the one on the right is kind of stripped down. It's a little bit too basic and too simple. It just looks unfinished. And then the middle one is kind of like the Goldilocks range of just the right amount of detail that sells the image and sells the character's abilities. Another cool thing, even though this is a really graphic show, we actually looked at real-world examples of wrinkling. Leyendeckers' book is kind of like the go-to Bible for how we approach wrinkling, and since we don't do any simulations, all this stuff is modeled in. So Renault sent over this guide as well, and it's basically these complementary shapes of these V-shapes that we add in areas of compression. And it's just very clean, but very, very simple and really well thought out. So this is a good example here where, there's not a whole lot going on to this surface, but when it changes planes, we get this nice compression of this V shape and then counter it in with another one to the side here. And same with the pants here, and you can also see how nicely all the beveling is cut in. So again, it's super clean, but always, thinking about silhouette and all those fundamentals of illustration and composition. Then I'm just going to run through some different examples here of some of the newer characters that we've built with our team. This one's done by Kenny Huang. This is Alejandra for the Hero short. And by the way, if you guys haven't seen any of the shorts, they're all on YouTube for free. You can watch them whenever. And our approach with ZBrush is we kind of just do like concept sculpting. So at the start, it's very loose. You can see the hair is just roughed in. It's just kind of blocky, but we're just trying to capture the essence and the size of it and the relationship to the head and see how it frames the face, maybe how it rests on the shoulders. This opens it up for conversations as well with rigging to say like, all right, how are we going to rig the hair? How are we going to handle that with the shoulders? Any of that kind of stuff. We also use Dynamesh quite a bit on the clothing because the wrinkling is always going to be scrutinized by the art directors and such because it is such a part of the style. Since this shirt is very simple, it's very basic, but it's not going to be like 3 of these wrinkles. They might say specifically, we just want to have 2. So with Dynamesh, we can always remove things, add things, change directions of them if they want. It's very freeing artistically. Another one by Tasso Giannis, super nice and clean silhouette, really strong read to this, nice angle changes, and also following the Leyendecker guidelines for the V-shaped wrinkle pattern. This is Baby Winston done by Jason Wang. And again, Dynamesh really made the forearms and the head on this particularly a lot more manageable. I mean, you could do this stuff in other ways, but ZBrush just saves you so much time. And working in production, it's always about schedules and deadlines and how fast you can get things done that still look amazing. So any way we can save time, we do, and ZBrush fortunately allows us, the artist to create whatever the art directors come up with. A couple other sculpts that he did for the Yakuza, for the Hanzo Genji short. We also save time by reusing pieces, so these are the same suit for the same guy. And lastly, this is Dr. Winston from Chung Kan. So for me personally, like the wrinkling on the pants is really successful, and it's also a big challenge artistically that I found with the Overwatch style is just trying to match that. It's not too detailed, it's not too simple, but it's just right. And so I was tasked with this guy on the right. This is one of the thugs for the 76 short. And again, earlier Seth was talking about reference, and I'm the same way. As soon as I get tasked with something, I just start looking up tons of reference. And for this guy, even though he's cartoony, I still looked at real-world anatomy references. On the left is Iggy Pop. Cool fact, Iggy Pop was also used for reference for Gollum. And then Wes Studi in the middle there. I thought this guy's face just kind of matched his a little bit, so I kind of looked at him. And then just pants I found on Google. And this is my first pass. This is kind of just like, hey, here's the concept. What do you guys think? And it's just a good opportunity for everybody to get together and look at the model in 3D and say like, all right, well this is working, this relationship's not, and get the discussion going. For me, like the neck is too long, like it kind of works in 2D, and this happens a lot, and Seth touched on this a little bit, is like you can't get too attached to your work in production because ultimately it's not your work, it's the studio's work or the client's work, so you're just creating it for them. So we ended up trimming the neck, you'll see in the next slide, and the pants were also just a little bit too overdone and a little bit distracting. And here's a close-up of the face. So one thing that's nice is, to get critiques done more quickly, highly recommend if you can, in your production, you can ask for a paint over. It just saves you a lot of time of them from saying like, hey, can you make the nose a little smaller or the ear a little bit shorter? Because all those terms are really relative. But if they can slap together this paint over in, like a half hour or so, I can match that in, maybe one more iteration, maybe two, but otherwise we could be chasing our tails and just wasting time. So here's the second pass. Oh, actually, the other thing was Junkrat down here on the right was another thing that they were looking at and saying, hey, this guy, we kind of want to pull him into that Overwatch style a little bit more. He was getting a little too realistic. So we adjusted him to look like this. And here's the final full body model with the updated pants. Just a little bit cleaner, a little bit better silhouette, not as busy. And then the next thing we did with, since these are crowds, what you want to do is always create variations and save money, essentially by throwing different costumes on your character. So for this guy, we added a shirt, a t-shirt, a bandana, some hair, sunglasses, all while using the same base mesh, the same body. That way the rig is all free. The servicing is a lot cheaper. And here's my updated sculpt on all the characters. So again, the body doesn't change at all, the pants and the shoes don't change at all, but new jacket, and now we have 4 versions of one character in a lot faster time. I also sculpted this little buckle in ZBrush, just the skull. Like this is all we really had to go with, but it could have been done in Maya, but you can do it probably 20 times faster inside of ZBrush just by sculpting it and then retopoing it. Here's the final turntable. This is just done with Maya's Playblast 2. Which we use a lot because this style is so graphic and cartoony that it gives you like a nice ambient kind of pastel-y look to it that really works for our approvals. Here's 2 servicing passes done by Jongha Baek. One thing that's really cool, if you haven't seen the short, they have this really neat skeletal glow-in-the-dark texture that we had to work with. And then one of the other challenges, we had some kickback on this guy, and again, this happens all the time in production. The original sculpt was cool and they liked it, but it was too sharp. So we ended up actually going back and softening out a lot of the wrinkling, especially on the chest, because even when we threw our subsurface skin shader on it, it was still looking a little bit too creased. And then when they put like real show lighting on it, it was creating some awkward shadows. So again, if you're getting new or getting started in production, just be humble and don't get too attached to your work because it's always going to get changed. Or like in Seth's example, you're just never even going to see it. Here's a shot of him in the short. So if you're clever, you spotted 3 versions of that guy in that little bit. So there's actually one more right here, and there was one earlier. Next, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about Warcraft. I did get to work briefly on the Legion cinematic. It was pretty much wrapping up whenever I got started. But I was tasked with one thing, which is actually pretty fun to work on. So this is the Inferno from Warcraft. And I thought this was neat to show because we were just talking about how with Overwatch, we're really honoring the look of the game characters one-to-one. Like, we're really matching it. Whereas the style of these different shows versus the game is different. So our Warcraft cinematics are always hyper-realistic versus the game, which is a little bit more stylized. So we actually push this a lot further to make it more realistic. Now, in this case, we had a concept sculpt already done by Alvaro, and this kind of like captured the look of the concept that they liked. This is all just like Dynamesh Dirty Geo. The mesh was actually remodeled again, based off of this by Kenson Yu and Kenny Wang. This happens again a lot. Like I said, we have a really, really small team, so it's super, super collaborative. One day you're working on one of your own things, the next day you're helping somebody out with theirs. It's really a lot of back and forth. So another tip for beginners out there is just being able to work with other people really well. It'll help you have a long career. 15? Perfect. So I actually, like I said, Alvaro did this guy. I didn't, but I got to do this cool lava green glowy effect that he did with effects. And whenever you get kicked off on a character, you kind of rattle through your Rolodex of like, okay, what am I going to use to make this guy look the best in the fastest amount of time? And for this guy, since I had his mesh already, I just did a quick reduction of all the different pieces so that I could work on them a lot more freely. And I didn't want to just retopologize all these things in Maya, which I could have done, but it would have probably taken me a couple weeks to do all these little pieces. I mean, there's like hundreds of these rocks. It was much easier to do it in ZBrush. So my workflow, I'm just going to play this like Camtasia video and talk over it as we're doing it and just show you how I did that. I'll also point out that this is my own custom interface here. I know Seth said he doesn't like to use a custom interface, but for me it's crucial. If I open up regular ZBrush, I don't even know what I'm looking at. But I highly recommend for beginners out there, if you don't have your own custom interface already, there's a ton of them that are out there free by maybe artists that you look up to or that you like. I grabbed this one originally from Danny Williams, a buddy of mine, and then I just kind of stripped it away and remade it into what I like. But to save time, you really need to make hotkeys and buttons and just things so that you're doing this a lot less and working a lot more. So I'll have my interface for free and all my brushes and all my materials, all that stuff. If people want to grab those later on, it's totally cool. So I'm just going to chip off working on this one little piece here. And the process I thought would be fastest to do this was just to paint a mask and extract the detail, or extract the mesh from that mask. So I'm just going to make the mesh white so I can see the material, the mask a lot easier. It's a cool trick I just did right there. I actually got this from Tasso. If you ever have a model and you're trying to rotate it around in ZBrush and the pivot isn't really where you want it and it's kind of floating out in world space, paint a quick mask on your mesh and it'll actually lock the pivot to that, and then you can rotate it around directly from there. So I just make this guy white so I can see it, and then I'm just painting into the cavities and the crevices of where I think the green lava would actually live. So I'm kind of following all those little cracks. For demo purposes, I kind of just wing it, and I'm just kind of doing this pretty quickly. I'm also working off the reference that they have, so I'm literally matching like the lines exactly where they wanted them and how they think they should flow. The other thing I do is I hit Control-Alt to make the mask sharper, just to give it a little bit of a tighter read. You can see it looks like it just gets darker, but that's all that's happening. And then once I have this kind of happily to where I like it, I skip to the next video on accident. Just give me 1 second here. What I'm going to do is just use this extract feature. And I use this thing all the time. I use it to create wristbands, belts, bandanas, shirts, anything that you already have an existing mesh. Again, you're saving time. You already have the shapes defined. Just go over here under the subtool and hit extract. Now, by default, it's just going to push geo off of the normal, and it doesn't know how big your model is, so it just pushes it out, and you can see how large that was. All you got to do is rotate your mesh. It's not going to bake in those settings until you hit this little accept button down here on the bottom. So I just play with these values of thickness until I like it, and I just hit accept. And it just pushes it barely off the surface. So you can see there. And now it also created a new subtool for me here. So I'm going to isolate this guy. And I only need it to be a single-sided object, because Effects is just going to use that as an emitter. And I just shift-click this guy, and I have a delete hidden button here. And then the last thing I'm going to do before I start working more on this guy is I do an auto groups. And what that's going to do is sometimes when I paint a mask, I accidentally paint somewhere I didn't intend to, and there's like tiny little like 3 polygon or 2 polygon pieces floating out in world space that I don't want to deal with. So I just auto group everything, and I just reshift my main piece, and I just do another delete hidden. And that makes sure that I only have one mesh. So I'm just going to unhide my original rock so I can start working these 2 pieces together. What's cool too is it actually retains your mask, so if you wanted to go back and change it, you have that available. So So I'm just going to bring the colors back so I can work off of the two shapes a little bit easier. And then honestly, I just use the standard brush inside of ZBrush, and I just chisel away these edges because it's super basic right now. It looks all consistent, but that's really just to get me something to start playing with. And then I just go back and forth with my reference and what I think is going to look visually interesting, and work rock by rock, piece by piece, all the way through this mesh. So like I said, I could have done this by hand in Maya. Probably would have taken 2 weeks. I think I was able to do this guy in like a day. The last thing I do before I export it is I just do a decimation master. Thank God for decimation master. I can't even say how many times I use it. So I do that for all the pieces you'll see here at the end. I have the entire mesh. And when you put it all together, it starts to look pretty cool. But all those pieces were done the exact same way. And here's just a turntable. And here he is in the short. I think we actually had to go back and add some to his feet because at last like 2 frames you see his feet. And then the last thing I want to talk about are some of the statues that we get to work on. And again, it's super cool. Like they just come up and say, hey, we're going to work on statues. Do you want to work on this crown or this BlizzCon statue? It's like, heck yeah. So here's some of the ones that I got to work on in the last year. For the crown, Blizzard's awesome in so many ways, but one of the really neat things they do is they honor their employees for years of service. So after like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20, you get like milestones. So after 20 years, you actually get this crown. Like it's like a real, like this big crown, full metal. This one is like the original one-off done by Weta Workshop. And we wanted to recreate another one of these so that we could give them to the new people that hit 20 years. We couldn't just easily replicate what they did because it's just too much, it's too expensive, and we needed to like mass produce a few of these. So we did it digitally. We had the original model, and then I just used ZBrush to add all the detail and then do like the keying of the object. So because there's so much to cover, I'm not really going to talk about keying or how to do 3D printing. There's so many talks or things online, classes you can watch on how to do that. But the basic premise is to think of it like an onion or like a G.I. Joe toy and work your way out to in. So on this guy, there was the gem and then the holder of the gem and then the piece for the nose. So you can see how we cut it up down here. And I worked with Brian Fay on this to do like the keying so that we could get all this stuff working out. And just the same way that Seth did the well where he cut the hole in, that's the same approach I use for the keying of this so that you add a key to this shape and you add a negative to this shape so they snap in together. The other thing that was neat for this, we actually were in talks with the vendor, and I highly recommend this if you're sending your stuff off for 3D printing. It's a cool workflow where you guys can kind of collaborate. I'm not sure with the monitor, you can see like the little ruffled detail here that we like matched based on the original. All this was just done with noise, like the noise filters, and a little bit of, tiny bit of sculpting, but mostly just noise. I just add all this stuff on a layer, each one of them, so there's like fine breakup. You can see I'll just toggle through. Like, you can almost not see it, but it just kind of slightly breaks the surface a little bit. And like the secondary level, tertiary level, basically just getting it. And I was sitting with Nick at my desk and just sliding it like, is this good? Is that good? Do you want this? Do you want that? And then you find the right thing that he likes. But then we send this file to the actual printing company, and then if they print it and it's like, you know what, those details that look good in 3D aren't actually coming out in the mesh, we can just bump them up on a layer. So that saved a lot of time. Yes. Okay. This one was a tracer statue that there's a collectible for this guy already done, but we redid this for, I think it was PAX East or one of the conventions. And shout out to Effects Deco. They actually created these large scale ones, but it was the same approach. We took the model and we essentially keyed it. We repositioned it into how they liked it. But one of the neat things that I wanted to bring up with doing collectibles or your own 3D printing or statues is you always have to worry about balance. And the original pose was awesome for her, but we realized that she's just going to fall over or break. So adding this teleport beam, gave her a second leg. Oh, that video is not going to play, but just for time's sake, I'm just going to move forward. But also, same approach for the Winston. Now, Arthas, this was one of the best things I got to work on. This is freaking nuts. This thing is 14 feet tall, it's 4,000 pounds, and it's real bronze.